Welcome back, March for Science, friends and family and allies. We're so excited to have you back with us tonight. Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Batrice. I'm the Interim Executive Director at March for Science. This is our second week with March for Science News, our weekly series where we discuss current events through the lens of science advocacy, which, as we have discussed for many years now, we think touches just about everything. So we're going to provide some updates on our movement's progress, provide opportunities for supporters to get involved, and maybe take a of questions if there is time. No guarantees, but we'll give it a try. So just a little bit of context and perspective. And actually, you know what? I'm so sorry. Before I just jump right on in, I'm going to say hello to our co-hosts tonight, Cody Hankerson and Dr. Lucky Tran. As y'all know, two of my favorite people, good friends, good colleagues. Lucky is our managing director and Cody is our organizing director, and they are both brilliant and wonderful, and I'm always so excited to get to be alongside them. Welcome. Hello. How are y'all doing?
Good. How are you doing, Rania? Hey, Cody. Hey, everyone out there.
Hey, y'all.
Yeah, good to see you. Again, thanks everybody for joining. So this week's events, it has been, I will just say from my end, very exciting to not wake up with sort of an immediate knot in the pit of my stomach or wake up in the middle of the night to see what egregious, horrendous thing has been done or said as of late. So that's been nice. But there is more than just those warm fuzzies at play here, right? And just feeling like we can breathe a little bit. So it was a week of really important executive orders being signed by President Biden, specifically on climate change and scientific integrity, which is something that we were just discussing, is something we're celebrating, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. Lucky, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, first of all, I think I feel that same relief, right? Because we're so used to, I don't know, being in bed at 3 a.m. and then getting this alert from Twitter and seeing an executive order that takes away people's fundamental human rights. So first off, congrats everyone for organizing so that we don't have to really deal with that anymore. And now we can be from a place of figuring out policies that serve the people and how we can address injustice using science and all these tools that we have. So that's where we're at. And I think that's the number one really reaction that I have too towards everything that's been happening. I think a couple of things before we sort of dive in. I think from an overall framework of looking at these executive orders, what really stood out for me were really two things. And number one is that science was definitely centered in all of these executive orders. I think that's really important, and it's something that our movement has been working towards, right? And in particular, there's been a few that have been on scientific integrity, which is, making sure that scientists can speak freely, even if they're in the government, that their findings are incorporated and listened to by lawmakers. And, that, of course, was under attack. And it's something, the reason why the March for Science started, right? Science, not silence. Right there. That's like a slogan. So it was really great to see that there were specific executive orders which said, like starting, a whole committees and whole reviews. There's a 120-day review process for looking at scientific integrity across all agencies and making sure that political interference to service, special interest doesn't really happen. And looking at these boards where Trump has been installing industry insiders rather than scientists to make sure that all is undone and that scientists head up these important agencies. So that's all important work. And on the climate side, I think the thing that stood out for me was that the executive orders sort of centered two things, and that's jobs and justice. And I think that's important because I think activists have known this for a long time and we've been advocating for it, but it hasn't really bubbled up to national policy, right? National policy has been about like carbon tax, credits and all of these things that don't really center injustice and disparities and things like that. And so it's something that grassroots social movements, including our own, including, youth climate strikers, including environmental justice organizations, have been advocating for a long time. And so I was glad to see that. And I think it's important because you can't address climate change without, centering the conditions that create it, namely injustice, disparities, racism, patriarchy, bigotry, all of these things. You can't address climate change without looking at those core conditions that create it. And the other thing with jobs is that I think there's a big myth with jobs, right? Is that if we take climate change action, we're going to take away jobs. And that's completely wrong. And I'm glad to see politicians finally saying, actually, if we take these paths towards climate action, we're going to create jobs. And so I thought the framing of these executive orders was really great. And I'd love to hear sort of what stood out from both of you from that perspective too.
Well, I will tell you, I have been banging my head against the wall a little bit, but also just hoping that folks see through it, because you're exactly right, especially on the jobs and justice front, but jobs in particular, we're seeing fossil fuel industries try to lean into this. All these labor jobs are being taken away and all this stuff. And it's just like, the fact of the matter is, one, let's just suspend reality and pretend like the fossil fuel industry was not the mess that it is. We know it is, but let's just pretend for a second. Those are temporary jobs. Those good paying union jobs are temporary jobs that are not consistent, and they only last a finite amount of time. There's only a handful of jobs that continue along pipelines, and those are not union jobs. And so the whole argument is crap, quite frankly, but we're seeing it, right? We're seeing commercials, we're seeing the talking points, we're seeing all this stuff. And Lucky, to your point, it's so important. If we really leaned into green infrastructure and infrastructure in general and just develop that development, those are consistent jobs across the country that cannot be outsourced. They have to be done right here. They're good paying jobs. And big, huge bonus, we don't decimate the planet at the same time. So, win, win, win. But just for everyone out there, if you hear that, please push back on it, because it's not true. I'm stepping off of my soapbox now. Cody, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I've been in a lot of that as well, in just my timeline, and then just in much more of like on the radio. And I often listen to more like conservative shows and podcasts to just get like a different perspective a lot of times. And that's what I've been hearing a ton of is, oh, well, if we take away like the Keystone XL pipeline, like what does this do for all these jobs? And I've been seeing all these like one-on-one pieces with a lot of people who have gotten a job, Rania would have been temporary. And none of this ever focuses on a way forward. It was just saying like, hey, you took away like a temporary job on like your second day in office or whatever. And rather than focusing on the reality that there are a lot of places, especially here in the Midwest, that we need a lot of that infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of places that while we're building up green energy, we get to focus on things like getting internet to rural communities. So there's a lot that can be done. I feel like it's often a battle of who can get their message out first. And so I'm glad that a lot of our community members are able to at least come here and hear a different perspective, or be able to know that what they're seeing maybe on like memes from like family members or on different websites, it has two sides.
Absolutely. And before we pivot onto like a not completely, but different topic, I do want to just remind folks to drop questions into the chat. And before we jump in, I just wanted Lucky to talk a little bit about the variants. I'm sure folks have seen in the news, there's 3 variants that have been discussed. I'm sure as viruses do, they mutate. It happens. It happens with the flu every year, et cetera. But I am not the expert or the scientist. Lucky is. So maybe you can give us a little overview about just some of the things that have been brought up this week on those variants.
Sure, I'm happy to. There's so much on this topic, actually. So please do drop questions in the comments. And you two, both Cody and Rania, if there's something that I've missed or you want clarification on, let me know. So yeah, my day job is at Columbia University. I work at the medical center there, doing science communication. So I've been talking to all these amazing experts who are working on vaccines and, the variants and sequencing these viruses. And so I guess the big news you've seen in the news this week is that we have these variants of coronavirus that are out there. And, well, first of all, I just want to get ahead of this. Like, it is problematic that we name them after places. I just want to acknowledge that. And it's sort of, as we go forward, we'll use that here, but there is a movement to sort of change that just because in terms of that's what we know them by right now. So just want to acknowledge that. This week we've been seeing that these mutations are quite widespread at the moment. And we don't have a real sort of feel on how widespread they are in the US because we're not doing too much enough genomic surveillance. So, but we know that, the British one is here, the one that they discovered in the UK, I will say, and the one that South African researchers discovered, which is different from where its origin is. It's just that scientists there discovered it, right? So want to make that clear too. So those are here. And I guess the big question is, what does that mean in terms of vaccines, right? We have this amazing technology that works really well against coronavirus. We've seen that from clinical trials. We've seen that from all these studies that have been coming out over the last few months. It works amazingly well, and the scientific community has been really impressed by the results we've been seeing. And we've started to vaccinate people slowly, not nearly enough, but we're on that train. There's a light at the end of the tunnel to this pandemic, right? But there's been several studies this week, from both all the companies who have been developing the vaccines and independent researchers at universities like Columbia and other universities as well, and the NIH, looking at these variants, which are essentially the virus with modifications, with mutations in the virus. The viruses still act very similarly, but some of the mutations can modify it such that if you create treatments against it, including vaccines, it might affect how effective those treatments or vaccines are. And the data, so the good news is with the current vaccines that we have out there, all of them are protective. They're still protective against the new variants. That is very good news because it means it's important for us to still get our vaccines, roll that out as quickly as possible, and that will protect us against, severe disease from coronavirus. And that's a big help for the community, right? And the reason why we still say that they're protective is that there's a big buffer. So when these were designed, in terms of how they work, there's a big margin of error for the vaccines. And so even though the variants have mutated and they're less effective, there's still a lot of leeway there. And so they're still protective for us. So that's the big story. I think something that the media is missing a little at the moment is that is definitely the case. And that's great news. And it is good news overall, but we still need to be watchful of the situation. And from an advocacy public health point of view, what that means is that the virus mutations happen because the virus is out there. It's out there in so many people around the world. The more sort of copies of this virus you have circulating, by chance, you have more chance for it to mutate, right? And so if we're seeing an effect that these variants can evade the immune system better than the original one, and they can sort of blunt the effectiveness of vaccines, we can't just keep letting this virus circulate on and on and on, and that puts us in a very precarious position. So really, the take home is that vaccines are still great. We still need to get them, and we need to get them as fast as possible. But from public health point of view, our governments need to be on it more than ever, and that means they need to figure out how to produce more doses, get it to the communities that are impacted the most and most at risk, which I don't think is happening efficiently or effectively enough at the moment. And then the vaccine itself isn't going to save us all by itself. It's not like we can just go on with our lives and forget about all of these other measures that we have. It's going to take time to get the vaccine out. And we already have amazing, powerful tools that aren't vaccines that can, fight against coronavirus. And that's wearing masks and social distancing. So that's something we can all do as individuals and help our community do, but we can also push the government to help produce masks and get them out to communities and help them have stronger laws. So that's really the big take home at the moment. And yeah, let us know if you have any more questions with that. But I think all that means is that we need to still continue to be advocates for public health measures, and we need to be vaccine ambassadors in our community, right?
Absolutely. And it's such an important point you bring up. I have actually heard with my own ears, of course I push back on it. People say things like, as soon as I get the vaccine, I'm going traveling. And it's like, wait, hang on. Like, that there are 2 shots, first of all, and no vaccine provides 100% immunity, right? And we still have not, just to your point, Lucky, it hasn't been distributed far and wide enough in order to just be like, okay, back to normal. I have all kinds of feelings about normal, but you know what I mean?
Yep, exactly.
And so your point is so important, that we do still need to be socially distancing. We do still need to be wearing those masks and being very smart. And if for no other reason than you love another person, I keep saying this, that, oftentimes it seems as though folks haven't been able to get on board for their own safety. Fine. What about for your grandmother or your sister or your nephew who has a respiratory illness or whatever? There's somebody out there that you love and care about. So if that's the reason that you take those precautions and are still diligent and really still listen to those public health experts, please do it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I do want to say that's definitely a very important point. And it's tricky. And it doesn't mean just because you have to still wear masks or social distance, doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work. It works. It's very effective. But the way vaccines work is it's not a just myself thing. It's the whole community. We have to protect everyone in the community. So we have to be patient whilst it rolls out to everyone. We can't be selfish in this endeavor. The more we are selfish, the more we expose the community potentially towards vulnerability. And so it's not a reason to think that the vaccine isn't worth you getting it. I think it's amazing. It'll prevent you from getting really sick if you unluckily catch the virus. But at the same time, we have to be patient and help everyone get access to the vaccine. That is what we need to all do, right?
Absolutely. And just to sort of be clear on my end, my point is you can't get the first vaccine and then that's it. Like, right?
Yeah.
We just
exactly.
Want to make sure. Follow
the science.
Experts, follow the science. Yeah. There's 2 for a reason. So I really, really just appreciate that overview, Lucky. It's so helpful because it can get so confusing sometimes. There's so much information. So thank you for that. I want to bounce over to Cody, who, as I mentioned, is our organizing director and has just been doing amazing, wonderful, incredible things with our volunteers and the March for Science community. So I would love to bounce over to Cody to just give us an update on what's going on with the organizing front of March for Science and the movement.
For sure. Thanks. So like a big part of, I think, what we mentioned at the beginning was the relief. I think a lot of us are still feeling like it's this moment where we all feel like we can just breathe a little bit and be able to just focus on back what we were doing, like what was going on in our lab or what was going on in our life. And what I think is really important and at the front of really everything that we're trying to do on the volunteer front is to do really good follow through. Like we're so close. We have the vaccine. It's being distributed. We're on the right path, but we have to follow through. And this is going to be exceptionally difficult now that we're getting into a phase where now that we're nearing this finish line, you're seeing a lot of restrictions come off of especially local governments. Like there are state governments that they're allowing or forcing their kids all back to school, or there are states that there are no more restrictions. And so with that comes an extra level of responsibility for us to put out proper information and not only put it out there, but put it out there in a way that people who are going about their lives working 40, 50, 60-hour weeks are still able to be a part of the conversation. There's a lot that Lucky does day to day and is able to read and interact with day to day that if I worked at say a Tyson packing plant, and I was working nonstop, and so was my significant other, so was my partner. It'd be really hard for me to keep up on the latest vaccine news, and I don't even know what a variant is. And well, if I get the first vaccine, but like I don't get the second vaccine, am I safe? And there are so many different questions on just even the safety aspect, where somebody has seen misinformation and it's made them hesitant to want to get this vaccine. So all of these things are what we're going to be fighting on the volunteer front. When we go and make content, we do research, we compile data, all of this. And with everything that came through President Biden's executive orders, like introducing climate policy into every single department in the government, that's a lot to track. And so what if, like, and I doubt very seriously that any branch of government would do this, but what if like their climate policy is that they're going to recycle? That's not going to be probably sufficient for what we're actually trying to accomplish as a movement. So being able to be engaged and monitor an entire government, not only here in the US, but of all the different nations across the world, is really going to take people not only being diligent about that research, but also bringing the skill set that a lot of you bring into the community. So a lot of y'all work in fields that when you see bad science, or when you're seeing something that is misleading, but the untrained eye may not be able to see that. So with our research, our data, and with our even field team, a lot of our efforts going to be going in and saying, is that true? And if it is, then disseminating that out to all of the different people who are within our network. So that is a big part of what we're doing right now. And our awesome chief of staff is going to be putting in our volunteer link at the bottom. If you didn't understand anything that I just said, but you know that you want to help, that's completely okay. Just go to that sign up link. It'll send you a notification on how to get set up on our Slack and Givitas channels. And then from there, you'll see all the different projects that we're working on right now.
Yeah, and like I said, Cody really has just done a phenomenal job organizing all of these different efforts and providing space. Y'all have heard us talk for a very long time now that this March for Science is not only for scientists. Of course, we love all of our scientists, but science advocacy comes in many forms. Whether you're an artist or an educator, or you just love science and you want to jump in and make a difference and do your part. Everyone's good at something, and Cody is really good at helping folks pick out what that thing is that is really, really impactful to the movement and to everything that we're working on here. So please know that you've got a place here, you've got a space here. You don't have to be a scientist, but if you are, jump on in. And as Cody said, our wonderful chief of staff, Izzy, is dropping in the volunteer link into the chat. She'll also be dropping in a donation link, as you can imagine. Donations to our small but mighty organization is what keeps things ticking and moving, and ability to really bring on any personnel or resources that we need to keep moving, including organizing resources. There's all these different amazing platforms. They cost money. So every dollar counts. Every dollar goes straight into our organizing operations, and Izzy will be dropping that link into the chat as well. So as I wrap us up here, any parting thoughts, Lucky?
So Katie Gibbs, who was the head of a org in Canada called Evidence for Democracy, so Canada had a fairly hostile to science government before we did here under the Harper government. So their scientists organized, and they, pushed back and elected a president and prime minister, in their case, who believes, and listens to scientists. And she told us at the time is that when you finally get a government that's willing to listen to scientists, your advocacy only becomes more important. It's now that it becomes more important, because now is the time when change is possible. Now is the time when, policy windows are open. So it's more important than ever that scientists and science advocates engage. They don't stop, they don't relax, and don't put their feet up, because now is when we can make tangible changes that mean real things to real people's lives. So yeah, with that thought, I think join our volunteer team if you want to get, feel that energy and keep going. And we could really do with your help. And now's the time that we can make amazing things happen. So get involved, everyone.
Thanks so much, Lucky. Cody, parting thoughts.
No, Lucky gave the best field pitch that I could have ever given. No, and he's completely right. The government, I sent this over to our team on the chat. The government is huge, right? There's a lot that goes into each department, and then each department's department, and then each department's department. There's over 3 million or 4 million people employed by by the federal government. So what we really need is for all of us as a community to come together and say, oh yeah, this is going on day to day. And so that way we can track it and make sure it's in line with things that we actually need in order to impact change. But yeah, with that said, thank you all so much for watching.
Thanks so much, Lucky. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, everybody out there for tuning in for this week's March for Science news, facts, and friends. I really appreciate everybody joining us. Please check out those links in the chat. Reach out. We are here for all of you. We're ready, willing, and able. We believe in working together and building strong coalitions, and every one of you is part of that. So thank you so much, and we'll